Welcome to All Things Engineering by EIT. This is a podcast where we cover industry insights, emerging trends, and practical knowledge across engineering disciplines. All right, welcome to the podcast. So today we are going to talk about the real value of diversity in engineering. And my name is Indu. I'm the Deputy Dean at EIT, the Engineering Institute of Technology. And joining us today, we've got Gillian. Perhaps Gillian, if you wanted to explain yourself a little bit about what you're doing currently in your role at Wood.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Indu. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. We're talking about something that's very near and dear to my heart. So I'm the head of engineering for the Wood business for APAC West, which includes our work from the Asia business into Western Australian projects as well.
Nice.
Been in that role for just coming up to a year, and I lead a team of somewhere around 400 to 500 engineers, designers, and technical people on our projects. So it's a joy, and something that really inspires me to work with the people at Wood.
Great. I think we've got the right person to talk about the diversity. I mean, we are diving into why diversity in engineering is it's not just a buzzword, but it's a competitive edge in today's market. Especially with lots of new challenges we are facing in the industry today. I mean, we've got climate change, we've got the AI side of things taking over, we've got globalization and the things that are associated with that's going on. So we do need that fresh and inclusive thinking. So my question to you perhaps is, what is diversity for you in terms of specifically engineering?
Okay, very good. And it's a good place to start. And it's something I've had a chance to talk around a little while, over this last little while too. So just to I forgot to say that I'm Australia's Engineer of the Year, for Engineers Australia Engineer of the Year. And one of the themes that I'm talking about, as I'm getting opportunities to speak with people in from this role, is about the importance of diversity. And for me, the diversity of engineering is particularly important, is the diversity of thought. I mean, I do have a strong sense of justice and I want people to be treated fairly. However, our engineers are predominantly, we're very well trained risk managers, if you think about it like that.
True.
And one of the things that can come with really strong risk management is protecting what's important to us, which can come naturally with some biased thinking. And I think as professionals, we have to be very careful about where our biases might come in, particularly if there's some outcome we really want that doesn't suit. Now, how does that deal with, what's that got to do with diversity? Where we've got strong thinkers who could have a perpetuality to bring some biases because of their strong thinking, it's super important that we have a range of different mindsets, experiences, perspectives, views, other things that we need to be managing, and all of those people together. So that's what makes up a really good engineering.
Yeah, it's great that you brought all those different things, because I think generally when we start thinking about diversity, predominantly it's always people think about perhaps race or gender. But again, it can extend beyond, like you said, it's a school of thought, it's experience. It can be even things like socioeconomic backgrounds and what people bring from that to the table. Your cultural background, and nowadays obviously we also have to be neurodiverse and inclusive to those ideas as well. I mean, perhaps if you can talk about in the group of 400-500 people that you manage, what kind of diversity mix that you see and how that has actually enhanced specific projects, perhaps, with an example? Yeah,
and I think that's one of the things that we really pride ourselves on, right? So if you walked around on our engineering floors here in Perth, you really could be anywhere in the world. So in terms of background, diversity of background, we've got people from India, Pakistan, Iran, I could just keep going, right? Australia, we've even got engineers from Australia. So we really do. We could be anywhere in the world, which is really good. But we also have a good, rich, diverse group of gender diversity is strong. Like we're pretty solidly 20% women.
Yeah, that's good.
And 80% men. We don't have any measures particularly for anyone that identifies as something else, but just in terms of women and men, we're about 20-80, which is
It's actually slightly above the
good.
national average of 16% women in engineering.
So that's strong. We also have quite a lot of neurodiversity, and we've begun to work a little more deliberately about how to make sure that the voice of the neurodivergent is heard, but also that we're able to work in ways that include them. And then we have people from all sorts of different backgrounds. I mean, my department's mostly oil and gas, brownfields and some greenfields work. We've got people from experience from all different ways as well, right? Yeah. So, I mean, predominantly they're people with the experience from the oil and gas industry. However, we have people that have come from other industries as well, because there's always things to learn, you know. So, so that's kind of what you'd see if you came to Wood. Yeah,
okay. No, I guess, I mean, even although I've been in the education field for a long time compared to the actual engineering working field, even when we are designing courses, I find that when we have a mix of people in the course advisory committee, their experience in terms of what they want to see actually enriches the course content rather than seeing just from one perspective, because it kind of gets become boring, I would say. But talking about the different diverse teams, do you think that bringing consciously diversity into a project team, for example, helps you get better outcomes?
It does, and let me give you some examples. So I've also worked as a risk manager directly before too, so I do have quite a strong view with regards to the kinds of risks that we are responsible for managing. And often when we hear risk, we think safety risk or maybe fiscal risk, but I'm talking about engineering risk as well, right? Like the kinds of like issues that can come up in engineering design. Now, to be able to make sure that you're covering all those edges, you do need to have different experiences and aspects and perspectives. You also have to have people that are willing and feel free to speak up about that. So it kind of moves us into a little bit about, well, there's diversity, but then there's also inclusion as well. Like we often talk about those as two very different things. And this is like a little example I've heard before, and I really like this. So diversity, if you think of it, is all different people being invited to the party. You can say that's diversity. And inclusion is all different people being invited to dance.
I see.
Right. So if you look from that, I'm committed that we have in our teams, in our engineering teams, that people are all invited to dance. Right. So when an issue comes up that might look a little bit odd or doesn't fit someone's idea of what good design is, that they definitely feel free that they can question that. Right. Because without those voices, we could end up with something that doesn't work. Right. So I think that's the mix that's really important, and I think that's we were talking before about the headwinds, I like to call it, from some areas in the world at the moment that are pushing back on the strength of diversity. And I would somewhat agree when it comes to simply meeting quotas. I think we have made some mistakes when it comes to meeting quotas. However, I might come back to that because it's there is value in that too.
It is,
it kind of, that whole movement to push back though does cheapen what we're about though, because it doesn't take into account the rich environment for creativity and results,
the actual value you can
and
see.
Management that comes from having a very diverse group of people working on a project.
It's good that you brought that issue of how things can get cheapened because of the quota system kind of thing. But taking that into play, what are some of the common myths or resistance points that you see in terms of diversity in engineering?
Oh, very good. Well, there's a few, right? Let me just I did take some notes about this because there's some beautiful ones, right? The diversity lower standards. I think that's the one that is striking home around the world. Like there was aeroplanes crashing and things like that. It was like, because we diluted our skill set. So that's an absolute myth, right? So diversity is about expanding the talent pool. It's about expanding the opportunity for having the right people in the right roles. It's not about compromising quality. Another one is, like this, we hire the best person for the job. Of course we hire the best person for the job, but if we're a hiring manager, it's our responsibility to hire the best person for the job. However, our conscious or even unconscious biases often influences who we see as the best. I'm going to hire that person because he looks like Mike who was here last time.
Yeah.
That would be a bias, right? Rather than what's the actual skill set that we need in this role now? How's it emerged since Mike was here? I'm sorry, I'm making Mike up. Any Mikes out there, please don't feel insulted. We want to make sure that we are fully understanding what the role is. And if we are thinking fully and thoroughly, we will be naturally filling our teams with more diversity. Yeah. So that's another one. And then another one, this is another one of my little favourite ones, diversity doesn't matter in technical fields. Now that's it's a cheap shot, right? Because, I mean, the reality is that we do have more STEM trained or what we call technical as engineers trained men. Absolutely, it matters. It absolutely matters. And it matters because engineering is about problem solving, human problems and solving those, and diverse perspectives are essential. So that's something.
I think it's great. I completely agree with you in terms of the myth that diversity comes at a cost of merit, but I think it's more about it's not at all lowering standards, but it's more about expanding the lens of how we see what is talent and what is needed for like you said, solving the actual problems which are all around human-centered.
Exactly.
And if you look at human population, you do have the 50-50 at least. And so, you do need that diversity of thought.
Can I just add one more too? Because I think it's another that I find is often what, when people are challenged about diversity, the myth is it's too hard to find diverse candidates. Okay, now, this often reflects limited recruiting, right? But also it's confirmation bias at play, right? So if I know in my heart of hearts there are no engineers that fit this kind, that are of the diversity that I might be being asked to expand into, I can't find them. Like it's like a really good example. My husband and I joke a little bit about like this is an old one, right? So you go to the fridge, right? And you know that there's no milk. You know there's no milk. You go to the fridge and you look in the fridge, and there's you can't see it, right? But we had the situation where my husband's like, oh, we've run out of milk. This is an example. We don't even drink milk, but anyway, we've run out of milk. And I said, oh, could you go back and have another look, but assume that there is milk? And he went back and he goes, oh my gosh, it's right in front of me. Right now, that's a really simple example, but imagine that in multi dimensions when you're confronting the talent pool and you know that there aren't any piping engineers that are women, for instance. You can't see them even if they jump up and do star jumps in front of you. So
I guess that's where that kind of what you talked about before is that bias kind of comes into play, what we think we know or what we think exists out there. And also sometimes people tend to misunderstand the fact of cultural fit, because I'm talking about, obviously we've got quite a bit of untapped talent pool right here in Western Australia, which is you've got the migrant population who you would see quite often are, well-educated engineers driving taxis and Ubers. And often they get overlooked because, you don't have local experience, you're not culturally fit sort of things. So I'm just thinking in terms of, you talked about recruitment and recruitment practices before. I'm thinking, how can we help the hiring practices evolve to help people like this come into play, as well as to avoid these unconscious bias and be able to see what's right in front of us?
Well, I think one of the most deliberate tactics, and it's one that's not necessarily popular, although we all have to do that, is to insist on equal talent pool. Like I know there are hiring managers that if they say they've got they've got a role they need to fill and they want to do, say, 4 interviews, they insist that we've got a diverse pool. They might say 2 of them need to be women, 2 of them need to be immigrants. Like they might actually say, I want you to deliberately go and look at those candidates. I don't want to talk to just 4 people that have got the same background diversity. So there's to do that. But there's also to keep creating a narrative in the workplace which is inclusive, right? Like there's some things that we're trying to do, like Woodside as an example, and I'm sure they wouldn't mind me saying this. When I was working in another company, they came back to us and they actually wrote a formal letter that said, please remove gender in your CTRs, your cost sheets, right? Because we were calling them man hours, right? They said, please remove all, that's kind of cool.
Yeah,
and of course we just went through and changed everything, right? So that we could, something as deliberate as that.
Correct. Yeah.
The other things we can do is when we're talking about a role, let's deliberately look for where are we already being biased, are we looking for someone and we're talking about that role as if it's already filled by someone who is fitting the bias.
Yeah.
Right. So let's be really mindful about that and then keep interrupting each other. But then also look from how we interview people, structure the interview to make sure that you're bringing out all the skill sets you need, not just have you had 30 years experience in designing this kind of
so
gear.
kind of tease out the best in people to showcase rather than, like you said, fit a mold that we're trying to fit.
Exactly, and I think it does take deliberate, because we all have biases, particularly when we're on the hook for something that's really important for our success. The biases get louder and stronger and it's harder to break them down. So it's important to work together to make sure we're interrupting each other's biases.
No, that's great. And I'm guessing that you talked about being deliberate about it. So as much as HR can go and do what we are expecting them to do with the hiring side of things, I think it's leaders who need to be more aware of what is required. So in terms of leaders as individuals or even teams, what can we do actively to foster that inclusivity and diversity?
In hiring or already in both?
In both, I would say. Because I think sometimes I'm also thinking from the perspective of retaining the diverse talent. Because sometimes, we may do all the right things and get the diversity people in place, but retaining them sometimes becomes...
the inclusion gets missed. Right. So I think the most important thing is to remember that people will stay and play where they experience being heard, making a difference and being valued for their contribution. So if you hire, like whatever diversity person that you went for or whatever, right? So you did that. And then all the structures around that doesn't see to it that person's voice is heard, that the explicit strengths that you hired them for aren't recognised equally with other things, that they don't get the credit where credit's due. Like, for instance, an example might be, say you hire someone who maybe hasn't got quite the number of years experience in that technical field, and they've been able to demonstrate clearly that they've been able to bring leadership and communication. Now, if you had that person in with your strict technical team and you only acknowledged the technical and you didn't keep fostering the other values that you wanted to him, that was leadership and all of those things, that person's going to get bored, feel excluded very quickly and going to feel like their voice doesn't matter. So I think it's important to make sure that you foster the environment that you've hired for. Right. And then if there are people who are being a little quiet, they feel like maybe people feel their voices, deliberately create comfortable situations for them to be able to speak up. It might mean ask them questions that they need to speak on, and just to say, all right, look, just all you guys and girls, please quieten for a minute. I want to understand what these three people have to say. Like I've done that before too. It can be uncomfortable because sometimes our introverted folk go, well, why is she talking to me? However, it is also deliberately delivering the message. Your voice is important. In fact, I insist you speak up, and that can leave people feeling bad.
It's great that you brought the point about being safe while you're being deliberate, because I think that's where mentorship and that can come into play. What's your thoughts on mentoring activities that sometimes organizations are now more actively being involved in?
It's really important. I mean, the human contact is super important, and I think if we really do want to strengthen the different diverse strengths in a business, we need to foster that. Now, I do deliberately offer support to the less represented groups. For instance, I will deliberately I'll enter into mentoring programs that are specifically to support women. I mean, let's just say it. Most diversity in engineering is fairly well covered, except gender diversity, where quite frankly we aren't so great, right? It's obviously not doing so well. In fact, a little statistic, when I graduated as an engineer, which was 32 years ago, a while ago, right? The number of women engineers in Australia was around 12%, 12 and a bit, edging on 13, right? Okay, a start, right? My expectation was, 30 years into my career, that it would be 50-50, surely, right? That's a long time, right? What it is now is it's edging on about 16. Now, this is the bit that's a little not so great for Australia, is of those 16% women who are working as engineers in Australia, only 25% of them were born in Australia. So you could say that we've moved the dial a little, but in terms of the comfort or interest or the pull for Australian-born women entering an engineering career, we've not moved the dial at all. In fact, it could be shown that we've moved backwards. So, I've got colleagues that have come from Iran and Egypt, and they're like, well, what are you doing? Like 50% participation in Iranian engineering schools, men and women, right? So I do deliberately mentor, get to know, I will focus on the women. Now, there was a young woman who I met a few weeks ago who had been awarded a scholarship to study engineering. Now, that's another really great way of fostering participation of a minority group, is to offer money and support to make it easier. And she was uncomfortable about that. Like a male colleague, a student, had said, hey, it's not fair, it's just as hard for me here as you, why do you get a scholarship and I don't? And she wanted to know how to talk about that, right? Now, what I said to her, I said, you think that's for you, that scholarship was for you. Now, don't get me wrong, that is your money. You can go and do with it whatever you want. But a scholarship like that isn't for the person. The scholarship like that is to address a missing in the environment that we're pulling for. Now, if we need to give you some money to make it easier for you, to help you out, but the scholarship is just as much for him as it is for you, because he gets to work in an environment that is more inclusive and balanced, and is going to be an environment where he's going to spend his whole career. Right. So I think we need to shift the narrative
from
and shift the narrative a bit about it. Like scholarships that support minority groups entering anything. Sure, on the surface it looks like it's for that person. It's not. It's to create a balance in the whole environment. It's not about that person at all. It's about the whole ecology of people working in that environment.
Very interesting. I've never really thought about it that way. So it's very interesting that, you maybe think in a very different space. Thank you. But I do want to say that even though you've got a 30-year career span, you look very young. You look like a recent graduate.
Recent graduate, I'll take that. Thank you.
But the thing is, I mean, it's very interesting that you brought up the fact that, that student, the male student, was asking the question about scholarship. I've recently been seeing that kind of narrative emerge where, the other gender is, speaking up, asking that, how come, you are the focus and we are not the focus, we are all the same and earning the same and whatnot. It is very important to address that. And I think that's where I really like your point, and I will take that, which is the, shifting the whole environment and getting them to understand that that's actually
what it's for. Yeah. And I work I volunteer with an organisation called the Hunger Project. Nothing to do with engineering at all, right? However, it is about dealing with systemic famine issues, like systemic hunger in developing countries. All right. Now, essentially, it's an education program that focuses on women. Now, some people would say, "Hey, was it all fair? Like the men are struggling too. Why focus on the women?" But it's been proven over and over and over again. If you nurture and focus on the women, everybody benefits. So it's kind of I bring some of that thinking into the communities that I'm accountable for in engineering too. It's not about it's not about just making sure one group or other wins. It's about how do you create an environment where engineers, all of us, can thrive. That's where you have an environment where you've got a diverse range of people, and people don't just kind of get stuck in their lanes and just live like that. I mean, how boring would that be? No, that's great. Slightly picking back on the statistics you talked about, where you mentioned that
potentially we could have gone backward within just the Australian population, where you started with 13% when you graduated. Now we're sitting at 16, but only 25% of that 16% is actually Australian-born engineers. I'm not sure, but do you think the statistics show that we are losing more people during the process? So they might have graduated from engineering, but they don't work in the engineering field. Are we failing to retain them during the...
Yeah. I think it's probably a bit of both. I've had a chance over the last few months to talk to a few universities, and a number of universities are saying that they're having trouble attracting STEM students, and particularly women. So there is that, and then there's also the environment. I think we just have to keep saying, like, the environment is still, like, minority of women. There are going to be, it's tiring. Like, I remember when I was about 30, I did get to the point where I'm going, wow, this is hard. I was lonely. Now I have changed my career a lot. I've moved into different things, and I have kind of gone looking for environments where I can have a self-expression and I can develop and grow. And if you're an engineer and you're in an environment where you're the only person who looks like you, you're the only person who thinks like you, you're the only person who has issues like you, maybe you're the only person who has got family issues like you have, and then when the meetings are always going to be starting at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock when school drop-off's happening, or there's nowhere for you to be able to deal with the issues, or there's no experience of being nurtured as a human, you're going to leave, or it's going to get hard, right? So I think we do lose a lot, and I think the statistics show that we do. It's funny, there are children squeaking outside. I don't know if you can hear that on the recording, right? But we do lose a number of our talented engineers, and they do leave maybe after child number 2, and it's often the women. Now, I think one of the things that the bigger companies are doing well is offering really good parent policies. The last 2 companies I've worked for have had exceptional parenting policies. Some might say maybe have gone over the top, but more men in my business use parental leave than women do. Now, it's also because we have more men, but they're using that really freely, which I think is creating an environment which is much more inclusive. Like, if our men are taking parental leave,
they understand what is going on.
They do, and also there's less stigma about it when our women take parental leave, and it really is available for all. And those policies are for retention of great talent. They're for creating an environment where people can do their best work, and it's also just sensible business. It is. Like we want. It's a part of our importance of a country like this. We want to make sure that we give the best and brightest the opportunity to have families. Then you need to enable that through good parenting policies.
One of the interesting things, and this is something I've personally pondered about, which I would like to unpack with you, is you mentioned that, for example, in Iran there is a 50-50 people in the classrooms with in engineering, right? That's the same thing I've seen. So I did my former years in Singapore, and there's not much difference. There was equal amount of boys and girls. We didn't really see any difference in who's there. Same thing I've seen in India as well. But when I went to Germany to do my internship, that's when I really started seeing a difference, because over there were very few female engineering students or graduates who are working in the industry, and people mistook me for a daughter visiting a father in the company rather than actually an engineering intern.
Wow.
And then the same thing happened when I came to study in Australia, which is, out of the 400 students in the lecture theatre, it was probably 10 females in there. And I was quite shocked to find what it was. Now, it's great to see you as the professional engineer of the year, because we talked about how we need to be able to see people to be able to then take on those roles more confidently. From that perspective, how do you see your being able to visibly now speak for the profession? Are you able to make any better voice out there?
I think so, and I hope so. So I have focused a lot of the opportunity I've had to talk to people. I've had an opportunity over the last few months to talk to hundreds, probably thousands of people, right? Which is great. And the kinds of questions I'm getting it's sometimes from, like, for instance, I was at a university awards night on Friday night. I was a keynote speaker there, and just being there and being a fully expressed engineer that just happens to be an Australian-born woman. I'm really I share too about I was brought up by my mother. I was brought up in a country area. All sorts of things that could have got in the way, and it's like a great career for me. So there's talking to people like that from a keynote role, but then afterwards, people want to come and talk, and then like sometimes the people who want to talk to me are the parents of the young women. They want to know, is it okay for my girl? Is she going to be okay? Is she going to have a good career? Tell me about your career. I want to be able to encourage her, but I'm really scared that she's going to be minimised, harmed. Like it's not going to be worth her while. She's not going to be paid what she's worth. They're worried about the environment because it is still so famously biased in one direction. So I am being loud and proud. That's one of the reasons why we're talking about this. I want people to be able to hear all the different perspectives and also question where they're at. I think the other thing, and I just want to add this in here too, because this just occurred to me, is there's quite a lot of narration in the world too about why there are more men in engineering than women, and this goes back to some of these myths. Right now, I've got a bit of a thought about this, and I'll talk to people about it when they come and ask me at these kinds of events. And I'm generalising horribly, so excuse the biases, but generally we could say that women are more interested in people. I'm sorry if I just insulted a whole bunch of people. Men tend to be a bit more interested in things. Now, you could just even look at if you look at other gender biased professions, nursing is predominantly women. Less men. And some of the best nurses in the world are men, right? So it's not, I'm not saying, I'm just speaking generally, right? So, and the science of engineering is a lot about things. It is, right? And has been. And I wouldn't want to put someone in an engineering degree if they weren't going to be able to deal with the things, like the physics and the maths, sufficiently to do that, right? However, if we look at the issues that we're dealing with as engineers, it's mostly about people and the interfaces and all the relationships between all the things and the people that are interacting and the teams that are interacting with those things. So as a profession, although we've drawn a lot of particular kind of people, if you like, men mostly, because we talk about it and relate to it like it's all about the things, more and more it's not. So I think the more that we can talk about what the whole career of an engineering career is, I tell you, my whole role is about the people and the spaces between all the things. You know, and being able how to relate to all those things. And if you look from that view, you could say women are a better fit. Right? So I'm totally bold about the opportunity that our career is for everyone. We really, at Engineers Australia, you hear say like engineering the career for all. It's one of the taglines. It truly is. And we need to keep working on the environment that we're inviting people into, because while we make it about the things, it's not going to be as attractive as if we make it about the problem solving that we're actually about.
I agree. I think you made the point where, when we started, we talked about the ecology, the whole environment. I think when we're talking about the whole environment, yes, the solution and the technical side of things, yes, perhaps some, men may be better at it than, women are. But I think you need to have both of it, because at the end of the day, you are creating those solutions for the human environment, which involves everybody. And so we need to have that different perspective. It always reminds me of this one specific example where they always talk about how seatbelts were never designed for women. And that's where when you are pregnant, and I've got 3 kids, so every single time I remember trying to put my seatbelt on, I've always felt really uncomfortable. I'm like, who the hell designed this damn thing? Because it's not designed for women. And then I realized that actually, it was never designed for women. It was never tested with a female. Crash tests, and crash tests were never tested with females either. So there are a lot of things where I think now that we're realizing, and we can probably
very practical, very practical. Very good. And I think we do have to be mindful too. I'm just reflecting on some of the women on my teams. They're really interested in the things. It really is like if there's and look, and I think there's also an engineering career, say it's 40 years, right? You've got opportunities to have all sorts of different focuses. I mean, I definitely had a stage where, I was fascinated with auto gas station design, you know, like in that I worked with a gas company, and it was all about making sure everything was right. And then I've had different stages where it's all been about the honour of the profession and working with safety and environmental issues, and it was all about that. And now it's about a thriving ecology of brilliant people making money for and looking after the oil and gas assets of Western Australia, you know. So it's everyone's
we're always changing. We are people, we have stages in career, stages in life, and we change our perspectives. Now, I completely agree. I started as a failure analysis engineer, so I always worked with things for a long time. And I really enjoyed it because it was like CSI of, looking at integrated chips and what went wrong.
Fantastic.
And solve the problems in the production line. But then again, I accidentally fell into education, but then that was all about nurturing the future engineers and people. And so you're right that, our phases and our career interests would change. So men and women equally can participate and, provide their actions there. I'm just aware of time. One perhaps tricky question before we go into kind of wrapping things up is, what is your thoughts on, because obviously, creating the environment sometimes require interventions where we may have to fulfill quotas. We may have to appoint people for quotas. What is your thoughts on those?
I have got some strong feelings about this, right? I don't, the word quota doesn't necessarily hit what I want, but this is an example. I like to think of it as a scorecard. Now, I like watching sport. I probably watch more sport than I play sport these days, but imagine, like, I don't know, if people listening to this, maybe they understand the game of Australian rules football. Fabulous. You've got these fit, mostly young people running around. They're athletic, they hitting, handballing. I'm just going to really mess this up, right? Kicking and, but imagine for a minute how boring that game would be if there was no scoreboard. It would be ridiculous. It would be strong young people running around kicking the ball. I mean, sometimes they're even kicking the ball backwards, and it's hard to know what's going on. If there was no score, it would not direct the flow of the aims of the game, which is, get the ball between the posts is the aim of the game, right? So the same as if we are to create a diverse team, if we were without a scoreboard, we would get thrown around by our biases. It would, and we wouldn't be able to notice where our attention was not on creating a diverse team. But just the same as a football game would be very boring if all you did was look at the scoreboard and not at the play, then that's also boring. So I think the scoreboard or the quota or whatever you're calling it, super boring if you're just looking at the numbers move or not. What's interesting is about how we play the game in the organisation where we're out to create that diversity. So I think they're critically important, and it's not about the score, it's about the play, and the score gives us the quality of, or what's the game that we're winning. And that's how I like to.
Well, that's a great analogy. Again, I'm going to now remember the scoreboard rather than the quotas. No, thank you very much. So if we are trying to wrap this up, what is something you will want to leave our listeners with in terms of what can they take away, one key takeaway, an actionable item perhaps that they can take away from this conversation that we are having about diversity?
I think just imagine what it would be like if everyone listened to this in their next meeting or their next hiring decision or the next whatever opportunity they had. We checked our own biases. And here's one for, again, if we're talking about gender diversity, here's one for the women. This is one for us to look out for. People have often asked me about how do we solve the diversity issue. And something I've had to confront is, well, I don't know, the way that it is really works for me. I kind of like being a bit different, So a bias that I have to deal with is, am I trying to keep around what feels good to me, being a bit different, right? So questioning my own biases or thinking that I know about what a candidate or a person in my team is thinking is something that I constantly check in on. So my invitation is check your biases, whether it's I want to hire another engineer whose name is Mike because that's who we had last time, or it's I kind of like being the only woman around here, I'm going to keep it that way. And that's a challenging one to hear, right? But check your biases and see what opens up.
No. Great points to kind of wrap this up. thank you very much for your time and your insights. I think we really picked the right person for the topic, and I've got really great insights to take away from you. The way you look at things is amazing. We'd like to have you again on the podcast, and thank you for your time.
Absolutely welcome. I'm really enjoying certainly the role of Engineer of the Year and having the opportunity to talk to people about something that is really, really important to me, like the environment of engineers in Australia and our ability to continue to create great homegrown engineers and invite the best engineers from around the world to be Australian engineers is something that's really near and dear. Partly is one of the reasons why I'm a governance board member for EIT is because the education of engineers and engineering people is really important. So thank you. Any time, and I look forward to another conversation.
No worries. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow and subscribe, and so that you don't miss future conversations. We've got some exciting guests lined up and a lot more to share. So do connect with us on social media and share your thoughts, questions, or experiences. So until next time, stay curious and keep pushing boundaries. Thanks, everyone.